We all said, yep, we'll try it.
I think about this a lot just in the context of really the internet and social media, you know. I think humans do have some desire to connect to one another, and it's a real love-hate relationship with how the internet fundamentally works. I don't see people logging off forever just because Twitter is not working. I feel like that just becomes the moment where maybe you start looking for the next thing. We're seeing an interesting thing happening with this kind of, optimism that maybe another company can do it differently, or at least being open to the idea that, there's another service people can use. You see all these folks jumping on board immediately and at least trying it out, which is, I guess, the best that Meta can hope for. I've seen this happen a bunch of times before in Silicon Valley too, so there's no guarantee of success here. I don't know if you remember Google Plus, for example, but just because they have big numbers early on doesn't mean that they're going to stick around. That said, maybe Meta will figure out some parts of this, secret formula of a non-toxic and actually responsible social media platform. I'm a little skeptical just because they don't have the greatest track record, but there's no question they absolutely have the power to at least change digital culture and tech history and how people communicate online. I just don't think we're going to see that on day one. I think we're going to have to wait till, year one is over to see if this thing actually sticks around.
Mike, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.
With no fees or minimums, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than deciding to listen to another episode of your favorite podcast. And with no overdraft fees, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank. Capital One NA. Member FDIC.
Here's what else you need to know today. A self-described white nationalist who killed 23 people at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, was sentenced to 90 consecutive life sentences on Friday. The gunman, who had written that he thought Hispanics were, quote, invading America, pled guilty to federal hate crime charges in the 2019 mass shooting, one of the deadliest attacks on Latinos in U.S. history. He still faces a separate state murder trial where Texas prosecutors have said they will seek the death penalty. And after meeting with economic policymakers in Beijing, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen promised the U.S. and China would pursue more frequent communication and said the bilateral relationship was on steadier footing despite deep differences. Yellen's trip to China, the first by a U.S. Treasury Secretary in 4 years, did not produce any new agreements or policy announcements, but it was seen as a positive step toward easing tensions between the two countries. Today's episode was produced by Ricky Novetsky, Rob Zipko, Eric Krupke, and Alex Sturr. It was edited by Patricia Willens with help from Mark George. Contains original music by Marian Lozano, Dan Powell, and Alicia Baitu, and was engineered by Alyssa Jane Moxley. Our theme music is by Jim Brunberg and Ben Landsberg of Wonderly. That's it for the Daily. I'm Natalie Kitroeff. See you tomorrow.
Today's episode is sponsored by Apollo Global Management.
Good morning. Welcome to Axios Today. It's Monday, July 10th. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Here's what you need to know today. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's important Chinese visit. Plus, CVS and Walgreens get into the clinical trials business. And today's one big thing, Biden's inside voice. Let's start this Monday morning catching you up quick with a few important headlines.
We believe that the world is big enough for both of our countries to thrive.
That's U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen after wrapping up more than 10 hours of meetings over 2 days in China. Relations between the two countries are at a low point. A reminder, this trip was rescheduled because of the Chinese spy balloon incident. And what's at stake isn't just politics, but the relationship between the world's two biggest economies. Secretary Yellen did not announce any agreements on major disputes, but she said officials from both countries would have more frequent and regular communication at the highest level. President Biden is also traveling. He's in Europe this week, and today he meets with not just British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, but also King Charles. The focus of that conversation will be climate change. But tomorrow, the focus shifts to Ukraine. Ahead of his meeting with NATO leaders in Lithuania, the president told CNN that Ukraine is not ready to join NATO while it's still at war with Russia. He added there was an agreement among NATO members about Ukraine joining the alliance because of the war. Speaking of the president, maybe you've noticed President Biden sometimes whispering in public settings, especially when answering questions from reporters. But behind closed doors, he's been known to take the volume up a notch or two. Axios' Alex Thompson is here with a closer look at how Joe Biden manages his public and private personas. Hi, Alex.
Hey, how are you doing?
Alex, I have to say I've always been intrigued with President Biden's whispers, especially during news conferences. So I wanted to start by playing this for you.
You know, when we talk about 28% tax rate, Ronald Reagan was 28% tax rate. People are waiting for relief. I got $1.9 trillion relief so far. Get vaccinated.
Alex, do we know why the president whispers like this?
Yeah, you notice how often when he's whispering, it's to really emphasize a certain point. And I can tell you from doing a lot of reporting with current and former Biden aides that he doesn't really whisper in private. Instead, he's a bit of a yeller. And he will really, tear into aides when he's very frustrated. Now, they describe these sort of outbursts more as angry interrogations, not sort of, volcanic tantrums. But, when Biden is frustrated with his aides, he will say things like, get the F out of here. How the F don't you know this? This is F and important. God damn it. Can I say that on the podcast? If the president says that, I feel like I can. So he will really lay into aides. In some ways, it's sort of become a White House initiation for staff. Even going back to his Senate days, is that, you really aren't a member of this White House staff until the president has yelled at you. And in some ways, if he doesn't yell at you, then that could actually be an ominous sign, because it means he doesn't care about your opinion.
We've sort of seen a few examples of this sometimes, of President Biden being a little short-tempered, and he's been caught on mic or speaking to people that way. How much of this is at odds with sort of his folksy kind of guy who loves ice cream image?
It is at odds with that public image, which is why in some cases staff are so caught off guard by it and aren't expecting it. This is a man that's basically been on the public stage for over 50 years, and he has a well-honed shtick, a lot of which is authentic to him. But he is very disciplined at keeping that temper out of sort of the public consciousness. And even the few times we've seen it, for example, when he called Fox's Peter Doocy, a stupid son of a bitch, it was because he was on a hot mic. It wasn't like it was in an interview. And, we have seen this on the campaign trail as well, just a few times. There was one time in Detroit with an auto worker where he said, "You're full of shit, man," and he told him to stop being a horse's ass.
Alex, why did you want to write this story?
I think that when someone's president, it's always just interesting to see both the public persona and how it contrasts with the private persona. Some aides who I've talked to, and I think part of the reason they talk to me is because they feel that if he showed his anger a little bit more, it could undercut the quote-unquote sleepy Joe image that Donald Trump and Republicans have attributed to him because of his frequent verbal slips, his stutter coming through. And I think if you saw his anger, it may turn some people off, but it also might make him look more engaged.
Alex Thompson is Axios' national political correspondent. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
In a moment, why big retail pharmacies are delving into the clinical trial business.
When it comes to building and financing stronger businesses, Apollo does the heavy lifting by providing customized capital solutions to drive innovation and job growth for America. Apollo, investing in tomorrow, today. Learn more at apollo.com.
Welcome back to Axios Today. I'm Nyla Purdue. Late last week, the FDA gave full approval to the drug Leqembi for patients who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. This comes after a large clinical trial conducted by pharmaceutical companies Eisai and Biogen. It's common for drug makers and research institutions to conduct such trials, but now national retailers like CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart have all entered the business, anxious to capture more of the healthcare market. These retailers are sitting on a trove of consumer data, explains Axios healthcare editor Tina Reed, but will this make it easier to recruit people to participate? Hi, Tina.
I know.
Tina, is all of this just the latest example of how the clinical trial market is evolving, especially since the pandemic?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, there was obviously big disruption. So as they were getting going again, there was really a push to decentralize trials to make it easier to do science via telehealth, using wearables, using remote locations. And we've also seen that Congress has passed a law basically saying that investigators have to do a better job at getting a more diverse representation of the United States in their trials. And so we're seeing just this collision of different changes within the clinical trial market that is really interesting to watch.
So recruitment and retention for trials has historically been dismal, and you just mentioned diversity. Why has that been such a challenge, and how will having a Walgreens or Walmart in this help that?
Only 5% of Americans ever actually participate in clinical trial. And then you think about trying to get the right people in those trials, different races, different genders, different geographic diversity, and it gets that much harder. Researchers are also up against potential stigma because certain races of people have concerns about scientific problems that have happened in the past. And so it's just really challenging to do this and to do it well. And these companies are saying they have these massive footprints, they have trusted relationships with the consumers in their communities, and they've got all this personal health information that they say can not only improve the clinical trial recruitment itself, such as making it more diverse, but also retain those patients in the trials by just making the whole process a lot easier. They also stand to gain a big revenue stream from some deep-pocketed life sciences companies if they really can gain some traction here.
Tina, you mentioned consumer data. Does this bring up privacy issues?
So when you're talking about protected health information, that means HIPAA is protecting that information, and they can only use that for healthcare reasons. But they can use it for recruitment if it's within the purview of their role as a provider. What they can't do, and what regulations do say, is they can't take, for instance, consumer data from their shopping history and somehow connect it with their protected health data.
Tina, you noted that especially for certain racial groups, there's certainly a very difficult history involving clinical trials. Today, in 2023, why are clinical trials so important?
We are worried about making sure we've got good science and medicine, and people of different races, people of different genders, ethnicities, geographic regions, all could potentially respond differently to different drugs, and we need to make sure that we understand how people are going to respond to these drugs if we're going to do a good job at getting them to the right people.
Tina Reed is Axios' healthcare editor. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you, Nyla.
One final story before we end today. The price of stamps went up yesterday for the third time in the past 12 months. A standard first-class U.S. stamp now costs 66 cents. This is a good time to stock up on Forever stamps. When Forever stamps were first launched in 2007, they cost 41 cents, and of course, they're still good. That's it for us today. You can always reach our team by emailing podcasts@axios.com, or you can text me at 202-918-4893. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning.
When it comes to building and financing stronger businesses, Apollo does the heavy lifting by providing customized capital solutions to drive innovation and job growth for America. Financing solutions to some of the world's most complex challenges can lead to a better working world. Apollo, investing in tomorrow today. Learn more at apollo.com.
WSJ Special Access gives you a front row seat to some of the Wall Street Journal's most exciting content, including exclusive live events and interviews with top executives and newsmakers, only for subscribers and only on Spotify.
Here's your money briefing for Monday, July 10th. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. Financial planners often tout the importance of diversifying your retirement account. In a lot of cases, a blend of stocks and bonds. But many older Americans are shunning that advice and investing heavily in stocks.
Some people are still working and, maybe they don't have a retirement date in sight. People who are 55, some of those people maybe are going to work for another 10 or 15 years, or they don't really know when they're going to retire, but they feel they can afford to take the risk.
We'll talk with our retirement reporter Ann Turgeson about the pros and cons of investing heavily in stocks. That's after the break.
Running a small business takes grit and determination, and a communications provider that's got your back. That's Spectrum Business. Fast, reliable communication solutions that keep your business going. Get 300 megabits per second internet, just $49.99 a month when bundled with Spectrum Business Connect, the all-in-one phone system that lets you work from anywhere on any device, and get a free mobile line for a year. Visit spectrum.com/go-faster. Restrictions apply. Services not available in all areas.
Many older Americans have a large portion of their retirement savings in stocks. WSJ reporter Ann Turgeson joins us to explain why financial planners think that could be a risky move. So Ann, how do financial planners typically recommend that people allocate their retirement portfolio?
Well, the specific allocation recommendation is going to vary by individual, but typically what you see is for people who are in retirement, approaching retirement, is a recommendation maybe to have about 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds. That's been the sort of traditional favorite allocation.
All right, so that's the recommendation, but what's the reality? How much are older Americans actually investing in stocks?
So some data from Vanguard shows that 401k investors who manage their own money as opposed to relying on some kind of financial advisory service to manage money for them, but these do-it-yourself investors over age 55, a large proportion of them, nearly half, held about 70% or more of their portfolio in stocks, which is a pretty aggressive allocation compared to the 60-40 traditional recommendation.
Now, are these new retirees we're talking about, or baby boomers who might have a larger portfolio to work with?
These are people who are 55 or older, so that can, be anywhere from Gen X to baby boom to older. It's a very large swath of people. Some of them have large portfolios and some of them don't.
Why is having a higher exposure to stocks later in life risky?
So it's risky because if you are relying on that money, in other words, like retirement is coming soon, or you're already in retirement and you need to withdraw money from your portfolio, if you have a large proportion in stocks and the stock market goes down, like we saw in 2008 when it went down pretty dramatically, it's difficult to recover if you're both taking money out of the portfolio and the value of the portfolio is declining swiftly or dramatically. So that's why financial advisors recommend that retirees have a certain